Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute, but before we do get started, I just wanted to get an idea of where everyone's joining us from. Put in the chat box. Awesome. All right, cool. So I'm going to get started and do some introductions. Hi, guys. I'm Naimisha, founder and creator of Products by Women. I also work in product and sit on a board of a couple of things. I do a bunch of things. I'm on the board of Pace University and also a member of the Forbes Council. You can learn all about me on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me there. I'd love to chat after the event. Before we do begin, I want to start off with some housekeeping tips. I want to also start off by saying a quick thank you to everybody who's here, and also specifically Starla. Thank you so much for your time and giving back. This event is recorded, and we will be sharing a copy of the event through our YouTube channel. So sit back and relax. You don't have to make notes of anything. We have a bunch of collab opportunities, including opportunities to host or speak in upcoming webinars, having your story published, and many more. So if you'd like to, we'd love to kind of chat and continue the conversation. Feel free to reach out to us at productsbywomen.com. With that, I would love for Starla to introduce herself and take over from here. Starla, I'd love for you to kind of talk about you, what you're doing, and everything that you have prepared for today. So go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Naimisha. It is so good to be with everyone. And we have some folks coming in slowly. Hi, Kayla. Hi, Tristan. So good to see those regular faces that I'm already familiar with. Well, I am Starla Sampaco. And so I currently work as a news anchor at KCTS 9, which is Seattle's PBS station. But I also founded Career Survival Guide, which helps women and professionals of color advocate for themselves at work. Outside of that, I'm also a contributor for the Harvard Business Review, and I really specialize in career content and helping women and POC advocate for themselves at work. So I'm very excited to be here with you. And before we jump into the workshop, I just want to start with a story about why self-advocacy is really just so important. Over the past couple of years, my career has really changed quite a bit. So in addition to being a news anchor, I decided to start my own business and also diversify my revenue streams. And one of my biggest revenue drivers is actually speaking engagements. So I've done many events as a speaker, from panels and workshops like this one to even keynote speeches for corporate clients. Now, these days, I do have a speakers bureau and an agent, but before I had all that, I negotiated all of my speaking fees myself. And I'll never forget actually my experience with one particular client. They were this large Fortune 500 company, and they said that they liked my work with Career Survival Guide, so they wanted to hire me and speak to their employees. Now, when they emailed me asking what I wanted to be paid, I really struggled to come up with a number, as I'm sure a lot of you have when you're in a job interview and they say, well, what are your salary expectations? So this company, this potential client, is asking me for my fee. And keep in mind, this is one of my very first paid gigs that I'd ever done. So I was really new. And I didn't have a lot of information about what a normal market rate was at the time. So based on other gigs I had done in the past, I thought, okay, well, maybe 4 figures makes sense. Like, that seems pretty normal for corporate stuff. And I felt at the time pretty confident. However, I was still really nervous to ask because I thought, I'm confident that this number is something they can afford, but there's also that off chance that it's not. And what if I'm asking for a number that's way too big and they think I'm, asking for way too much, and they just think, who do you think you are? And so a lot of us have those fears, right? When we're about to ask for money, especially. So I was really nervous to ask. And so I had talked to different speakers, and I also talked to my boyfriend and said, could you please proofread my email? Because I'm really nervous to send this number. So he saw the low 4-figure fee I asked for, and he said, I think you should ask for $1,000 more. The worst they can say is no. And I thought, $1,000 more? Oh my goodness, but I should try it anyway, and I should advocate for myself. So I did that. I was nervous to bump up my fee, but I did it. I sent the email and they responded, "That fee seems reasonable." Big sigh of relief. I didn't come off too aggressive and I didn't ask for too much. Well, fast forward a few months, we did the event. I got great feedback. One audience member said it was one of the best events that they had seen at the company. And then they did their post-event survey and I got perfect marks from the folks who attended. Well, not long after, I ended up meeting someone from that company who has hired paid speakers in the past. We started talking about speaker compensation, and she was curious about how much her company had paid me. So I told her, and she sighed, and she shared, "You should have asked for a compensation about 2 or 3 times more than what you actually asked for." So not only was there ample room in their budget, but they had actually already paid a lot of speakers much more than that in the past, speakers who didn't get as good of feedback as I did. I even remember her telling me something along the lines of, "It sucks because even if the event organizers know that you're selling yourself short, they usually won't tell you because their goal is to stay within budget." So of course, that's not the news that you ever want to hear, that you lowballed yourself. But I learned a lot from that experience. My takeaway from that really was that no matter what circumstances you find yourself in, the best person who can advocate for you is you. And it is your job alone to not only ask for what you need and deserve, but to also do your homework and find out what to ask for, which is something that I should have spent more time on. So while other people can help advocate for you in the workplace, it really comes down to you, not just having the courage and confidence to ask, but also the knowledge and finding ways to get that information so that you can ask for what you deserve. And that's why it's so important to advocate for yourself, to start advocating for yourself early, and to not just wait for somebody else to do it. Because if we don't advocate for ourselves, we'll never get to where we need to go in our careers, and we'll actually leave a lot of money on the table. So let me actually share this stat with you. Naimisha, I'm going to share my screen. Let's hit present. All right. Naimisha, can you see my screen? Thumbs up. Perfect. Yep. So this is a quote from economist Linda Babcock. And she has said that she tells her graduate students to negotiate their pay at the very start of their career, because if you don't, you can leave up to $1.5 million on the table in lost earnings over your lifetime. And that does not include company retirement contributions. So let's sit with that for a second. There is a real cost to not advocating for ourselves and asking for what we are worth. $1.5 million, that's life-changing, right? So you might be wondering, how can I be a better advocate for myself at work? How do I promote my value? Well, that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So as a quick intro, if we haven't met before, as I said, my name's Starla Sampaco, and I founded Career Survival Guide. Now, I help women in POC through career workshops, coaching and consulting services, free content on YouTube and Instagram. And as an extension of this work, I've also conducted research interviews with women in POC, or people of color, to better understand what they need to feel supported in the workplace. So in this talk and throughout this talk, I'll use examples and anecdotes from my research interviews, as well as interviews that I've done for my YouTube series. All right. So when we talk about self-advocacy in the career context, I'm usually referring to about 5 things. So the first is asking for what you need, taking credit for your work. That's number 2. 3, taking up space. 4, setting boundaries. And 5, standing up for yourself when your boundaries are crossed. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to focus on the first 2 of those items. So asking for what you need and also taking credit for your work. So why then is it so important for us to advocate for ourselves? Now, one of the main reasons is this. You can't get what you don't ask for, as you saw in my story from the beginning of this talk. And here's an example from my research that illustrates this. So as part of my user research, I interviewed a 30-year-old Indian woman. So she immigrated to the US from India, and she works in the tech industry. And I'll read off what she says here. She told me, "My father-in-law told me it would be offensive if I negotiated my pay when I was promoted. So I didn't negotiate. I later found out that my coworker, who was doing the same work as me, was actually making more money than me. The only difference was that they asked and I didn't." So you cannot get what you do not ask for, right? And it goes back to this idea of if you're the only one staying silent, but the folks next to you are asking for more, your needs won't necessarily be prioritized. So you have to be able to ask for what you need. My research has also showed me that people of color, especially those of Asian backgrounds and or immigrant backgrounds, we really struggle to advocate for ourselves because of this deep-rooted belief that we should just be grateful to have a job, even if it's not a job that we actually like. And there's also this element of fear, right? Fear of speaking up, of making others uncomfortable, fear of coming off like you're complaining or coming off too aggressive when you ask for more, or if you put up boundaries and say, no, I'm not going to do that. So how do we overcome some of this cultural conditioning so we can be more comfortable asking for what we need, especially as women and women of color? So the first tip I can give you is to be aware of the opportunity cost of not asking. As you saw in that opening slide, there's a big financial cost if you don't advocate for yourself and ask for what you need, especially in a salary negotiation context. The second tip I can give you is to take stock of your contributions and your impacts at work. Because before you can really convince anyone that you deserve more, you have to believe it yourself. It starts with you. So one simple exercise that I always recommend with clients and employees I speak to through my corporate work is to track your work wins. This is a very easy way to start. All you have to do is start an Excel sheet or a Google spreadsheet of all the accomplishments you've achieved at work and schedule time in your calendar every week, even if it's just 5 minutes on a Friday afternoon, to update the spreadsheet and jot down a sentence or two about what you did well at work. Did you get all your deliverables in long before deadline? Did you get superb feedback on a project? If you did, write that down under your work wins. Were you responsible for a large increase in revenue for your company? Definitely write that down in your work wins, because not only will this help boost your confidence so that you feel more comfortable asking, it'll also prevent you from forgetting about your accomplishments and the feedback you've received. It can also help you prepare for performance reviews or other job interviews if you decide to pursue a different role or even a different company. Now, along that line of doing negotiations, either for a raise or asking for money for your starting salary, for example, we actually got a lot of questions along the lines of, how would I even know what to ask for, especially if you're switching industries, or for a lot of you who I know are early career, it's much harder because you don't have a lot of that industry experience yet. Well, the answer to that is to do your research. Now, in the context of salary or compensation negotiations, this will definitely help you feel more confident when you make a specific ask. As I mentioned in the first story I shared, that lack of transparency around money is what keeps people from getting paid what they are worth and what they deserve. In the US, especially, in other countries as well, but definitely in the US, there is that money taboo. But that shouldn't stop you from having conversations around money. There is a way to navigate around that. So I'm sure you've heard this advice that when you're doing salary research, you can always start with sites like payscale.com and glassdoor.com. Now, those are really great places to start, but don't stop there. In order to get information that's tailored to the specific role, the specific company, and the specific city that you're applying for, you need to actually set up meetings with people who have roles that are similar to what you're applying for, or people who have had those roles in the past. If they're not within your company, you can find them on LinkedIn and send them a message saying something like, I'm reaching out because I'm applying for the product manager role within your org or your department. And I saw that you previously had a similar role. If you have 20 minutes, I would love to schedule a meeting to hear your feedback on how I can set myself up for success as an applicant. Now, once you're actually in the meeting and they agree to meet, you can say something like, I'm interviewing for this job and I expect they'll ask me to name my desired salary range. Based on my research, I plan to ask for a range of X to Y. Do you think that sounds about right, or should I ask for more? Now, at this point, I always add that I don't expect the other person to tell me exactly what they make, excuse me, and that I'm just asking for that information to make sure that I have an answer in case the employer asks me to name a number during the interview process. And I've done this multiple times, and I recommend approaching it this way because you're not directly asking someone what they make. So if they're uncomfortable talking about money, they won't feel put on the spot because you're not asking them for their specific number. You're just asking them for advice on a range. But in my experience, this approach usually leads to people just telling me what they make anyway. And sometimes they'll even say, have you done one-on-ones with anyone else? Like, what are they saying? Because I haven't asked anyone yet what they're making. And I'm wondering if my salary is in line with everyone else. So in my experience, this is kind of the best approach because you're navigating that money taboo. You're getting the information you need, but you're not putting people on the spot. All right, let's talk about performance reviews and also job interviews, because when it's time for you to prepare for a job interview or a performance review, you can use that work wins list that I mentioned earlier to organize your thoughts, but you can also take it one step further as you prepare to advocate for yourself. For example, if you are crafting your resume or you're preparing your documentation for your performance reviews when you request a raise, don't just spew off a list of contributions or tasks you completed. So you're not just copying and pasting that spreadsheet into the document. You actually really need to connect your impacts to the organization's goals. So show them how your specific actions helped the company. Did your contributions save them money or time? Did your actions lead to a significant increase in revenue? You need to make that connection very clear. And when you talk about your accomplishments, they need to align with the interests of the decision maker. So the person who's deciding whether to hire you or to promote you. And those have to align so that it doesn't seem like a give and take relationship where you're just asking for something at their expense. You need to make it seem like you are on the same team, because you are, and you're working towards the same goals. You have to make it really clear that the work you've been doing has been helping them achieve their goals as well. And if you're able to articulate this, the decision maker will be more likely to believe that you deserve what you're asking for, and also more likely to give you what you're asking for. Because again, it starts with you. So you need to be proactive and also very explicit in your communications about why you deserve the job, the promotion, or the raise. Because if no one knows about your value or your contributions, you can't get rewarded for them. So just keep that in mind. You have to not only do the work and track the work, but you also have to amplify the work and communicate about the work that you've done. It's your responsibility to track these contributions and present them to the decision makers. Now, one pro tip I have when you are asking for a raise or a promotion, and I've done this, is to get the job description that you were hired for and create an annotated version. So this annotated version will have all the original language from your original job description, but you'll also include bullet points about how you went above and beyond. So in order to successfully get more money, you need to show how you exceeded the expectations in your current role. All right, so just make sure to remember that pro tip. If you feel like that's appropriate, get that original job description and create the annotated version with the additional things you did on top of everything that was already in your job description. Okay. Another tip I have for you is to advocate for yourself year-round, not just when you're asking for a raise or a promotion. So here are some specific ways that you can do this. When you receive good feedback from colleagues or clients, forward it to your manager. This is especially important when you're working from home because your manager won't know how hard you're working behind the scenes and they won't understand the impacts you're making unless you go out of your way to show them. Because if you're working from home, they can't see you hustling in the corner at your desk. So you need to make this very clear to them. You can also email them with updates to keep them in the loop so they know what you're up to. And you can also get creative with how you keep your managers in the loop. I'll give you an example from my job. So in my own job as a news anchor, it felt really weird at the start of the pandemic to rehearse for live events and not be able to be in the office or get feedback in real time. Because when the stay-at-home orders started, they allowed me to go into the office for the actual events, but I couldn't just hang out there every single workday and rehearse. So what I did was I recorded a couple minutes of myself practicing my scripts for the live events, and I sent it to my managers for feedback because I truly wanted to know what they thought. So not only did I get valuable feedback from them as a result of doing this, but they also then understood how much work I was putting in behind the scenes, which they wouldn't have known otherwise, right? And this is really helpful, actually, leading up to those discussions around compensation and raises, because they knew that I was overperforming and really working hard behind the scenes. Another strategy you can try is sending a thank you note with a humble brag. And I first heard this idea from Alina Ansari, who has also done workshops with Products by Women before. She's a content program manager at Microsoft. And she says that when she wraps up a successful project, she sends an email giving kudos to everyone on the team. And when you do this, give kudos to your individual team members, but also give a kudos to yourself. That's the humble brag part. Include a line about the contributions you made and the good feedback you got, and make sure to quantify your impacts. Now, the great thing about this strategy is that you're not just advocating for yourself, you're also advocating for the people you work with as well. Another way to advocate for yourself year-round is to ask others to advocate for you and ask them to put in a good word for you. Microsoft, for example, has a tool called Perspectives, and basically you can just request feedback from coworkers and that feedback will be visible to your manager. But if you don't have a tool like that, I've also heard of folks at other companies asking their coworkers or their managers their other managers to email their main manager with good feedback about them. And often people are happy to do it. You just have to ask. Again, you have to ask for what you need. Because throughout the year, you want to prime your manager so that they start to see you as someone who's deserving of a promotion or a raise long before you actually ask for the promotion or the raise. So this process of asking for what you need is much longer than that short period of time that performance reviews are taking place. Like, this should really be happening year round. So really make it a practice. And the last tip I'll share is about resources and support. So when you are asking for additional resources or support for the job that you're currently in. Now, the big thing about this is that, again, communication is key. You cannot expect your manager to know what you need, because sometimes it's not always obvious to them, right? Like they manage a lot of people and there's a lot of moving parts. They're very busy. They won't always know what you need. So don't wait for them to ask. Go to them if you really need extra resources or support. So if you need help finding the courage to ask for these resources and the support, I love to refer to this quote from Jessica Rovniak. She's a senior manager for YouTube content at NBC's Peacock. And she says, if your company expects you to make lemonade, don't be afraid to ask for the lemons. I just love that. So when you're asking for the lemons, right, you need to explain a few things. So you can explain the value of what you're asking for. Will this extra resource or support save the company time or money? Or will it help the company make more money? Often, if that's the big goal of your department, that bottom line, then that's a very strong argument to make. So be very clear about that. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're asking for more resources, you'll often get pushback like, we have a limited budget right now. Are you sure there's nothing else we can do in the meantime? Well, when you're making the case for these extra resources, talk about how you've exhausted other alternatives. So, as someone with a video production background, I was often advocating for more gear. So, that could mean cameras or tripods, anything to help me with my production. And whenever I made these asks, I always made sure to include examples of how I exhausted the other alternatives, but still needed the additional resources. Like if we had a camera that was breaking down, I'd make sure to tell my manager, I really tried to make this work, but it's not getting done what I need to get done. And so make sure that you have articulated that before you go to your manager. Is there anything else that can take the place of this resource I'm requesting? If not, definitely go talk to your manager about that. You can also talk about your pain points, and it's okay to go into detail about this. So you can say something like, when I don't have X resource, it slows down these other parts of my workflow. So I just want to make sure that I can get these deliverables in on time. And without this resource, it's really going to push production back. Often that can really influence your manager to try and help you get those resources that you're requesting. The last tip I have about asking for resources is talk about how your competitors are handling the same pain points. So if your competitors are beating you in a very specific way, would these resources help you catch up to those competitors? That's something that I find really interesting because I remember in the past when I was producing a video news show, I was asking for this backdrop. I just wanted my company to buy a backdrop so that we could have a blank canvas behind me. And I remember showing them links to a competitor's work and saying, because they have this blank backdrop, there's so much more space for cool graphics. It's really opening up the storytelling capability of our work, but it's also just more engaging. And I also knew that audience engagement was something that they prioritized a lot. So again, when you are asking for resources, you want to appeal to the decision makers' interests and their priorities, because that'll give you the best chance of getting what you've asked for. All right, we have just a few minutes left until Q&A, so I'm going to leave you with this. If you take anything away from this event, remember this. Self-advocacy skills are like muscles. So they get stronger the more you use them. So don't be afraid to take credit for your work or ask for what you need, because the more you do it, the easier it will get. One of the biggest tips I can give you is to not just wait until you feel confident before you start advocating for yourself, because starting is actually how you build that confidence. You won't build that confidence until you have experience advocating for yourself. And once you have that experience under your belt, then you'll feel more comfortable doing it. So start before you feel ready. Also, if you are a working professional, remember that you got hired for this role because you bring value to the company and the people around you. When your needs are met, the company wins because you're able to bring your best self to work. So don't be afraid to ask. And of course, no one can advocate for you the way that you can. Advocating for yourself is the only way for you to get to where you need to go. And that is so important to keep in mind, especially as women. And the last thing, when you advocate for yourself, you advocate for others as well. So many of us, women of color in particular, we've been conditioned to believe that it's not okay to ask for more or to advocate for ourselves. But when you advocate for yourself, it disrupts this norm. And if other women see you doing it, they can get inspired to advocate for themselves, and it can cause a ripple effect and some really positive change within our workplaces. So don't forget that. As we transition to Q&A, I will leave my information on the screen, so feel free to connect with me on these platforms and also add me on LinkedIn and let me know that you found me through Products by Women. Naimesha, I'll hand it back to you.
That was so awesome, Starla. Thank you so much for your amazing and really important talk. I think this was long due and it was really important that we were able to kind of catch up and have this conversation, especially with the last bit, which you spoke about. I remember in my previous organization, and this is way before COVID even happened, we didn't really have a work from home policy. And I remember my husband at that point of time was working from Canada, and I actually went to my husband, my manager, and I mentioned to him about how I needed that flexibility. And he was very hesitant at first, but he made it happen. But I was able to kind of convince the organization to give me that flexibility. Of course, now it's the new norm. But that really opened up doors, not just for myself, but the entire organization. And work from home actually became an option for a lot of people after that. So definitely, if you think you are deserving of something, go to your manager and make a case, and and explain to them why. We have a lot of questions coming in, Starla, but I wanted to start off by asking this important question about negotiation, and for someone who's actually going in for negotiation, whether the job market's really hot right now. There are a lot of offers coming in. How do you even know what is a fair salary? Especially for those, like, there are a bunch of resources like levels.fyi, there's Glassdoor, there's Blind, there's so much happening. But I often feel like I always get overwhelmed when a recruiter asks me, what is your expectation? I'm like, am I saying the right thing? Specifically for relocation or switching to a startup. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I always think that before you even apply for the role or reach out to the employer, it really does help to set up that one-on-one time with current employees or current managers at the company. That's what I've done throughout my entire career, and that's given me so many advantages, not just because you get to have that one-on-one connection with a potential hiring manager, but also because the employees can tell you how to strengthen your application, but also what to expect in terms of salary ranges. So I definitely say use the tip that I mentioned earlier about sitting down one-on-one with someone over Zoom or Teams or coffee if we're post-pandemic, and saying something like, if they ask me for what my expected range is, I'm planning to ask for this range. What are your thoughts on that? Should I go higher, or do you think that's about right? And that will often just open the door for that salary conversation that can be uncomfortable at times, but really those folks have been in the same they've been in the same situation and the same position that you have. So more times than not, they are happy to help you. With startups, I understand it can be a little bit different. So I remember when I was applying for a startup where I eventually accepted an offer, I had a contact within the organization who was giving me that insider information. And I had told him about what my offer was, and I had said it seems a little low. And he gave me the tip of, well, if you're starting off, you can always ask, why don't we start off on a 3-month contract? And then at the end of the 3 months, we can reassess if you'd like to offer me a full-time job here or not, and see if it's a good fit. And I think that's actually quite common. In my experience, I've heard from a lot of folks in the Seattle area to start with that shorter contract. When I was offered the contract, I was able to negotiate it to 6 months. So don't forget to negotiate your contract length, because that's a very short amount of time. But once you're able to do that, that can actually give you more insights of what this job actually looks like. Because if you are working at a startup, or if you're working on a project or an industry that's really innovative and you don't have a lot of folks who you can talk to who have done that exact type of work, then once you're actually in the role, you can decide, okay, I think these tasks are worth this much for my time. And of course, keep networking. I'm introverted. I know that it can be painful to reach out to folks. I don't think that networking events where you're doing speed networking is necessarily the best way to network. I think really it helps to go onto LinkedIn, find people who have the jobs that you want or jobs that are similar within your industry, and talk to them. And once you just keep gathering that data, you can start to realize, okay, well, in the city of Seattle, it seems like the high end is this much, low end is this much. But you can also, negotiate for other things in your compensation package, like stock options if you work for a company that's publicly traded, or additional vacation time, or, you know, there are other types of benefits that you can negotiate. So don't forget that either if you're working for a company that for some reason can't reach your salary expectations.
Absolutely. And I think that's an entirely, completely new conversation that we need to have, an entire workshop that can be dedicated to negotiating your salary or your offer letter. But really, I mean, when you're thinking about a situation when you feel like you're, let's talk about toxic work environments, or just kind of thinking about when you feel like you're not really getting the what you deserve at your workplace, and if you feel like your manager isn't really advocating for you at your work, or when you're not in the room specifically, how does one deal with that situation?
Yeah, when your manager isn't a good advocate for you, that's tough. And I've been in that situation in the past. I was in a very specific situation. I won't mention the name of the company, but I had a manager, and based on our conversations, when I asked for my raise, they just seemed like they weren't even listening to me once I introduced. It was the tone was very eye roll, like, oh, like another person asking for a raise. And it was really frustrating for me because I really wanted to work there and I liked the work, but I also knew that I could get paid more elsewhere. And this is where it is tough being a woman and a woman of color. I had spoken to a colleague who was a woman of color, and she had said, honestly, upper management here puts more weight on the opinions and the statements of white male managers. And I know you have a really good relationship with this one white male manager.
Yeah,
I would recommend that you go through him. And I didn't only reach out to him because he was a white man. We had a very good working relationship, but that was definitely a very helpful piece of information for me to get. So I would never say go around your manager's back, but look at the people around your manager. Who else can advocate for you? Who else can influence the decisions? Who can influence the decision maker? If you don't have direct access to the decision maker, which sometimes it seems like it's on purpose around performance review times, talk to your other managers and see if they can help you, because it can only help if the decision maker is hearing from 3 different managers. Wow, this person's really overperforming. I think they really deserve a raise. That's way better than just having the one person advocate for you or not advocate for you in this case.
for sure. And I just pulled up this in really cool post that Ramit Sethi shared on Instagram. 5 signs your job might be toxic. Number 1 is when you speak up at work and your boss doesn't listen. Number 2 is you don't respect the people you work with. Number 3 is you're underpaid, or you feel you're underpaid. Number 4 is you dread going to work on Sundays. Number 5 is you've unwillingly had the same job title or salary for over 3 years. With that, I really wanted to go to the next question, which I had is, when do you know that it's time to move on?
Oh, yeah. I knew it was time to move on. When I lost respect for myself for working at a past company. Like, it was not just about the pay, it was just like the day to day, the microaggressions, like the weird comments that were coming from managers, and all these things overall. It was very clear to me that I had to leave. Now, the moment that it becomes clear to you that you have to leave is not the same moment necessarily that you quit. And that situation that I just mentioned, I think I had about 6 months between that moment of deciding to leave, between actually putting in my notice, because you want to create that exit strategy. Like, what are you going to do for money? Do you have enough savings to live off of if you don't have a job lined up? Also, can you be interviewing for jobs right now so that you do have a job to go straight into after you quit this job? in that situation, I was very young when that happened. And so it felt appropriate for me and my family for me to just move back in with my parents. So I was really lucky and privileged to have that option. So if you have that option, consider that. But if you don't have that option, then you really need to prioritize your financial well-being and that emergency fund before you actually quit. But I do agree with that list that you gave off, where if there's no opportunities for growth, if you don't feel respected or valued as an employee, and also if you just don't see it getting better, then it's probably time to start thinking about that exit strategy.
For sure. And the next question that I love this question because I feel like it's really something that's close to my heart. Where, if everyone around you, including your colleagues and your friends, start getting promoted, and you're the only one who's like behind for whatever reasons, how do you continue to stay motivated? On one side, you're like really happy with your friend, but then you're just human. You also feel like, why not me? How do
Yeah.
you, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, it is tough sometimes, and it's hard not to compare yourself, especially if it's your friends. But you have to keep in mind that if you're comparing yourself to friends in other industries and other companies, your career path is not going to look the same as theirs. But if you are comparing yourself to actual colleagues at work and you feel like they are getting promoted, but you're not, and you truly feel like your work has value and should be promoted and is deserving of a raise, that's when you need to initiate that conversation with your manager and ask, hey, what's going on? I'd really like to have a level change, or I'd really like to get promoted in X number of years or in the next year. What do I need to do to get there?
Hmm.
And then make sure to document what they say. And then after that amount of time has passed, make sure that you've done all of the things that they said, and then revisit that conversation and say, all right, I did all the things you asked. It's time for a raise.
Absolutely. Yep. 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 And sometimes there's another question here, which is talking about sometimes I'm not sure if my boss is saying to things to me and he's being passive aggressive or it's just a joke. How do I determine how to react?
Oh gosh. I would say don't get defensive for saying, because it could just be a joke. We don't know. But the only way you'll find out is if you just ask, oh, what did you mean by that? Just approach it with curiosity,
Yeah.
right? Follow your curiosity. Don't accuse them of anything, because it's very possible. And I've seen this among clients who didn't grow up in the US. So sometimes there are certain phrases that come up and they're just thinking, what does that mean? And sometimes, you'll have managers who've only worked with folks who grew up in the US, and they don't really understand that, there might be a bit of a cultural barrier, just a little bit, for folks understanding all of their jokes. So you actually do need to find a way to communicate to them that you're not necessarily on the same page, but just a question like, oh, what did you mean by that? Or wait, what did you say? And usually that gives them an opportunity to clarify. But when you just keep quiet, then there's not really that opportunity to learn for both sides, right? For you and for your manager.
For sure, absolutely. And before we move into the questions that are coming in from the chat, I did want to pause and check with you on any resources for salary, for podcasts, for communities, books, anything that you're reading right now. We'd love to kind of make a note of that.
Ooh, I like Minda Harts. She wrote The Memo, which is all about helping women of color get a seat at the table. That's her book. I really like Minda Harts. She's on Instagram. You can follow her there. I love Ruchika Tulshyan. So she's a DEI expert, and she does a lot of content around, what it's like to be an only or an other in your workplace. I think she does really amazing content. I also have a YouTube channel, Career Survival Guide. So I go into more detail about salary negotiations, and I also bring in guest experts to come and talk about that, like Tori Dunlap, who's the creator of Her First 100K. She's all about financial literacy, and I think she does amazing work. And of course, Products by Women. I've learned so much from you. I actually learned of Products by Women through Upasna when I attended her talk, and just there's so much stuff on your YouTube channel that I think folks should look at, and if they've missed those events live.
Awesome. Thank you. And I also wanted to kind of give this opportunity. I know we've disabled some of the options, but feel free to raise your hand and we'll be happy to pull you up on stage so you can ask questions live. But here's a question that came in about how do you advocate to gain certifications for tuition reimbursement? I think I've been in that position where you feel like you need this to kind of advance in your skill sets and upskill really to do your job better, but there's not a budget set aside. Like, is there any way one can do a better job of kind of advocating and saying that I really need this to do my job better?
Interesting. I'm just looking at Jesse's comment, getting
Yep.
certifications. So they don't relate to your role, but they do relate to other
Yep.
product managers. So when Jesse says at more technical companies, could that mean a competitor though?
Let's see if Jesse's here. Let's see if she'd like to. Jesse, would you like to chat? I've unmuted you. No.
That's okay. If she's not able to chime in, what I've seen is there are actually some companies that already have that as a benefit, like
Mhm.
professional training and resources that a lot of employees, especially early career employees, just do not know about and are not aware of. So first check. Oh, is Jesse here?
Oh, hi, sorry, the unmute wasn't working. So I mainly have questions because I'm thinking about transitioning to a more technical company. And my current company does offer tuition reimbursement, but how to make the argument when it's a skill that doesn't say directly impact my role, but it would help with another role that I'm going for.
Yeah, I would think, because I don't have a lot of details on your company, but I would imagine there must be a way for you to creatively think about what are some transferable skills from that course or certification that you're pursuing that can apply to your current role. So I think making sure to articulate that before you go to your boss so that they don't assume that you're trying to move to a competitor would be really smart. Because I could imagine I know that a lot of tech companies get they get very weird once they can kind of sense that an employee is about to transition to a competitor. So just be very careful about that, and just think about what are some of those transferable skills that you think can transfer to your current role.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And there's another question which came in from Brian, which spoke about when should I be advocating for myself beyond the performance review time? How frequently should I be communicating to my supervisor or their supervisor?
So I think that anytime you get good feedback that your supervisor or their supervisor would benefit from seeing, forward that to them. And it doesn't, there's no set timeline because they also want to know that their organization is reaching its goals and making its customers or clients happy. So I don't think you need to worry so much about annoying them, especially if it's something like a quick email that you can forward that shows that you've had high impact at the company. That's also a good question to have within the first 30 days of being on a new job. Like, how often should I be communicating with you about some updates that I've had? Do we need to set up monthly or weekly syncs? That'll depend on the type of organization you're in and how busy your skip level or your supervisor is. But at least with your direct supervisor, you should probably aim for at least a cadence of once a week if you don't already have a team meeting set in place. Namisha, do you think once a week is probably, that seems like pretty standard?
I do, yeah. I mean, I have a check-in with my manager every week, so I think that's usually pretty common, like a weekly check-in or a bi-weekly check-in, depending on really the projects that you're on. So yeah, that sounds about right. I have a very interesting question from Brian, which is interesting because I worked at a social enterprise before I moved to my current agency role. He speaks about how he's working in a nonprofit management conveys the perception that funding is super tight. Comments can be things are tight, you're deserving, but we really, I mean, it's talking about how they don't have the budgets and things, and how can he really advocate for himself and negotiate and actually get a raise in that environment. um, yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think I've been there, so I can definitely say that everything that Starla shared in the past, which is documenting your wins and sharing that in your one-on-ones, and also your mid-year reviews and end of year reviews, is a great way. But Starla, do you have any additional tips on how one can negotiate or how one can kind of navigate that conversation, especially in a nonprofit?
Yeah, I think this line from Brian's comment is telling, but I can't live on my salary, right? And I, I understand loving the work you do, and I find a lot of journalists, especially writers, find themselves in this position of I love the work I do, but I can't live off of it. So I often see folks doing one of two things. First thing, just quitting and going to a different industry that uses similar skills but pays more. So that's very common. But for folks who really want to stick around in that industry, what I've seen is if the company says we cannot raise your compensation, I haven't seen a lot of cases where folks have been able to successfully navigate that, especially in places like nonprofits, or industries that just typically don't pay a lot. So often I'll see folks who will start their side hustles or do consulting on the side. There's often this joke in journalism, like we do things on the side so we can afford to stay in journalism. And so unfortunately, those are the two things that I've seen, especially if they've been really clear that they cannot compensate you anymore. And so that's really tough. I've heard of folks who will just talk to their managers and say, look, I can't stay, and give a timeline of I need to have an answer because I have a family and I cannot stay, which can sometimes give them a little bit more urgency, but I just haven't seen a lot of examples of folks changing that once they make it clear that they can't go over.
Yeah. And then just another tip there, Brian, would be that, look at adjacent organizations that are actually social enterprises and not nonprofits, because I think the structure there would be very different. I mean, I worked at an organization which is a social enterprise, and to be honest, we were paid very fairly. So the difference between a nonprofit and a social enterprise is that you're actually making a lot of profit, and you're doing good. So I was building products for good for immigrants and refugees, and we were really in that space versus a core nonprofit. So if you really like the work that you do, look at all the other organizations that are in your space, and see, maybe perhaps you'll find something else which is similar to what you're doing and which also pays pretty fairly. So yeah. That's just an add-on there. I did want to give everybody else the opportunity to raise your hand. We are almost at the 8 p.m. ET mark, so yeah. And there's another question here, Starla, from Jesse. I am an early in my career and struggle with assessing a fair salary. What resources do you recommend for salary research based on specific skills? This is an interesting question.
I've liked using Glassdoor and PayScale just to start, but again, I think talking to the actual folks who are in those companies that you think you would be a good fit for will probably be your best bet, because that's the most tailored information, right? It's tailored to not only the role, the types of roles you're looking at, specific companies you're targeting, but also the specific cities, because you might find that the same role in different cities are compensated differently. So I think having that one-on-one information will really help you. That does take a lot of time, right? So that is something where if you are early in your career and you're thinking of maybe making your next step, give yourself a whole 6 months to a year of gathering that research so that you can be really confident in assessing what your salary is. Because these tips, we go through them in workshops, but they actually can span years. I mean, I still do one-on-ones to figure out what the market rate is, because that's changing for the types of roles that I'm in all the time. So that's an ongoing process, and really that one-on-one time will really help you. And don't just stick to folks who have been in that role. You can also talk to folks who have managed people who are in the types of roles that you're looking for. They often have a much broader range of types of expertise, industry, and skills that they can kind of inform you on. So don't be afraid to reach out to people managers too.
Oh yeah, this is so important. I was in my friend's house in Virginia 2 weeks ago, and she works in data, and she was talking to me about how she's paid super fairly. And this is someone who I grew up with. So I was like, what is really fair? And she told me her number, and I was like, do you even know how much people are making in tech? So I was like, the first thing is talking to everybody and getting a good sense of, like, because she's really smart, and getting a sense of where you stand in terms of numbers. So for everyone who's out here, please do talk to people, set up that time and get an idea of where you really stand in terms of compensation, because there's always scope for negotiation at every single stage when you receive that offer letter, whether it's your benefits package, whether it's your leave, whether it's anything, you have that scope to actually sit down and negotiate that piece. And I've also dropped a bunch of other resources apart from what Starla just mentioned, which is H1B data, blind, levels.fyi. I really review them every time I'm going in for an interview. So definitely check that out. Nikita, for product did someone? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Starla.
The other thing too is when you're looking at these websites or even blind, a lot of the information lacks a lot of context. So when I was considering pivoting into tech, I remember speaking to someone who was informing me about marketing skills that I might be a good fit for. And she actually advised me, when you get the job requisition number, talk to someone you know within this company who can help you figure out if this role, which is marketing, it's marketing no matter what, would it fall though under like a marketing for an engineering org or a marketer for the marketing org? Because you can have certain types of roles within specific departments or organizations within a larger company with very different compensation structures. And that's something to keep in mind, because they had said, look, you can join this tech company and do marketing in this department for 70K, or if you got into this engineering org, you would get paid 6 figures if you got the job. That's very significant for, also exercising marketing roles. Like, it's the same skills, right? So make sure to talk to folks about stuff like that, because that's the context that I think can be really lacking from Blind and Glassdoor when you see those big ranges.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just to add on is really be strategic about how you are applying to different companies based on the skill sets that you have. You could be spending the same amount of time, and somebody who's in an organization could be getting paid a lot more because of done the research. So spend time, do that research, make sure that you're making the right money moves and negotiating and really advocating for what you deserve. Yeah, and we have about 3 minutes left, and really, Starla, thank you so much for this incredible session. Everybody who's out here, please do follow Starla and all her work. We will be sharing this recording via our YouTube channel and also circulating it via our newsletters. And yeah, with that, Starla, any parting words?
No, the only thing is advocating for yourself is like a muscle. So start practicing, start doing it early, and do it often, and that'll just serve you in your career.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here on a Monday evening. At least for me, it's almost 8 p.m. ET. And Starla, have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.